Guys, I don't see anybody in here, and I know nobody's in here because I've just been doing my thing. Okay. I want to talk about toxic masculinity today. Can't you get used to these glasses? I'm not sure I like these. These are my older ones. Um, Hot mess of a week or two. I've had a lot of things happening on a personal level, on a professional level. I've been doing different things. And let's just talk about all of that. And there's been a lot of this crazy stuff going on as well, not just because of Steven Anderson either. Okay, if you know who I am, great. Hey, Lee. Hey, Cheryl. If you know who I am, great. I'm Suzanne Tidkemar. I used to write for a place called Pathos, a column called No Longer Quivering. Okay. I used to write about the quiverful, evangelical, non denominational, taco church, and high demand totalitarian religious organization sort of thing, which is what Taco Church stands for, totalitarian authoritative church organization. So there you go. Don't be rude to anybody in the comments. And these are just my considered opinions, but they are opinions. Okay, so what have we got going on here? It has just been crazy. We're in the middle of the worst part of rainy season has started. It's raining 24/7. I don't go in the pool. I wear long sleeves. I'm in the house shivering, not turning on the AC. And then we had an earthquake this morning that woke me up because it disrupted the electricity for a while. It knocked a bunch of my stuff around. So I had things that fell over. And this is in the middle of very low barometric pressures we've been having here. So, of course, all of this nonsense is happening in the middle of the nonsense that is Steven Anderson and his children talking about their childhood. Now, not that I blame any of them. No, not at all. But I think that the boys maybe have some strange ideas about what masculinity actually is. I had concerns after watching Dead Domain's interview with Isaac because he seemed like he was touch, just a touch, a bit of not. I did not see what he was doing, and he came across as rather racist in some of his statements. John is just John and Miriam. I'm going to take them off the table because the two of them are young. Okay, 17, 19, the oldest and most mature people on the planet. Hey, we're all young once, and they've both been just saying how they see their family. And the other night, Isaac spoke. Okay, I was interested to hear what Isaac said, and he corroborated Isaac, John, and Miriam. It was astounding how much he corroborated what they had to say. He also threw in an unhealthy dose of fat shaming. Solomon, yeah, Solomon. I'm sorry, did I not say Solomon? Isaac said some racist things. Solomon said some fat shaming things. It was just, ugh. It was really off-putting. Why? Because I can tell you as somebody who has trouble moving around now because I had a thalamic stroke, gained a little weight. Mostly because I can't move around and do the things I used to do. I can't walk anywhere. I fall down easily. I can walk in the pool. Still a mermaid in the pool, but I'm not a mermaid out. I'm a clunky. Get out of my way. And it's coming through tight now. And Solomon, it was a bit odd. And I could tell by the way he was talking about these ultra runs he does, which I think is great. If you're doing that and that's your thing, go for it. Go for it. Go for it. Go for it. You should be doing the things that fill you up, that you enjoy doing. You shouldn't be doing things that you don't want to do. I'm not a believer in making yourself fit anybody else's mode or model. And we know up until a couple of weeks ago that Solomon was a member of Faithful Word Baptist in good standing right up until his father kicked him out for telling his mother that he agreed with his uncle. I just gotta say, okay, family is tough. Family is very tough. I mean, I'll admit that. My family is no more perfect than anybody else's. I'm no more perfect than anyone else. Family is hard. It just is. It always has been. It always will be. The best you can do is just try to survive it. That's all I can say. And Solomon's tale of Stephen breaking his all of his possessions to me was really hard to listen to. With all the domestic abuse being exposed lately, I thought some of the disturbing things Vodi Bochum said. He said domestic violence wouldn't be an issue if wives would obey. That's quite disturbing, Debbie. That's quite disturbing. That sounds like something that the transformed wife would come up with. And we all know if there's a toxic take on something, she will find it every single time. She just will find it and go for it. And I'm not down with that. I'm not down with abuse of women. And who wants a wife that's obedient to the point of just ridiculousness? I've known some wives that were obedient even to the fact that the husband was not just not just using the electrical cord on the kids, but was doing things to them, was doing SA of them. And the wife said, "Well, I have to obey him." Well, he's harming your children. How can you obey that? How can you respect that? How can you stay? Now, Debbie Pearl has a different idea about that. She says you turn him into the police, you testify at the trial if you must, which I don't even know if that's a thing because usually there's spousal privilege and it's hard to make you um, testify against your spouse. It's not even legal in most places. The transformed wife does endorse Vodi Bochum and Michael Pearl. Yeah, I know she does. She does. And she has the same toxic take. Have you seen Debbie right now? She is talking about her horizontal fellowship life with her husband. God, I hate having to use these euphemisms for YouTube. And she was talking about so many years. She said 5 minutes in lube, 10 minutes in lube, 5 minutes in lube, smile while you're doing it. And I've always said any woman that treats her horizontal fellowship life that way is not having a real good time. And that husband must really be crap in bed. And she's crap about telling him what she likes in bed. She was saying, she made a statement about dating Ken, her husband, and Ken stealing her joy before they even got married when they were dating. And I was backing away like that when I was reading that because to me that's like one of the biggest red flags out there. Why would you marry someone who steals your joy before you even marry them? I don't think there was much in the way of romantic love or wanting him or sexual desire or anything like that on her end when they got married. If I remember right in her book, it seemed like she was thinking, "Oh, he'd be a good provider. He would buy me a big house. I'll have a nice car, blah, blah, blah. He's an up and coming good Christian man. Don't marry anybody thinking that they're going to support you and fulfill you in financial ways is wrong. I was under the impression a spouse could not be compelled. Exactly. That's what I think. That's not the same as her voluntarily doing it. Yeah, probably. Um, the way she talks about their wedding night honeymoon is awful and sounds horrendous. Also, look at the Pearl's honeymoon and Debbie talking about passing out a couple of days later because she was doing all this heavy lifting and physical labor while Mike was treating her like an inflatable horizontal fellowship doll. I critiqued Debbie Pearl's created to be his helpmeet and felt like screaming. I have to control my words sometimes. Debbie, I had a hard time with that one too, but the one that I had the hardest time with was Laurie Alexander's book. And when I was writing at Pathos, I did these huge takedowns of every chapter because, like, her chapter on financial health in the family is said, don't use your credit cards and buy used. Don't buy new if you can. That's not very helpful. You have to understand how money works, how you can make money work for you, how to use your credit, not just responsibly, but use it to increase your health, your financial health. Example, when I took my Amazon credit card, they were offering $100 gift card if you do that. And that was a big incentive to get the stupid thing. And she missed all of those things. There are ways to use credit that benefit your family and come out way ahead. But you have the wisdom to do that. And it's a good idea to study some investing and to figure out how to invest. And I don't mean Bitcoin or EFTs or any of that stuff. I mean just basic investing. And let me tell you an investing story. Bitcoin, when it came out at one point, Bitcoins were $200 each. I bought like 10 of them for $200 each. They went up to $600 each and I sold them. Last year, I think it was, they were at like $60,000 each. If I had held on to those stupid things, I would have made a ton of money. But I was happy that I tripled my money and I got out. That's the risk you take, but you need to learn that. Credit is a necessary skill now. If you ever want a loan or a car or mortgage, exactly, you have to know what you're doing. Lori sounds low in compassion for sick, disabled, and needy people as well as misogynist. Yeah, she is. She has no compassion for the sick or disabled. And it's ironic because she herself has struggled with her health tremendously. She's had a brain tumor several times, any number of things. Yet she doesn't have any compassion, even though her second brain tumor, I just said at that point and no longer quivering, I'm not talking about her anymore. I'm not picking on somebody who's dealing with a brain tumor. I'm just not doing it. And I stood by that. Ironically, 2 or 3 days later, that's when Ken reached out to my husband and insisting that he control me. Uh, oh, yeah, right. He controlled me. We don't have that kind of relationship. We treat each other like adults, like partners, not you're going to do as I say. We never have. The few times we tried the kind of extreme submission they're talking about in a lot of these groups, it just fell apart for us. We never had a good experience with it. Neither one of us were comfortable. Yeah, Lori. So going back to those guys, Solomon, Isaac, especially. Let's leave John and Miriam off to the side. Even though I've seen that this impacts him too. Stephen Anderson's ideas about gender. Okay. He thinks that the same thing that a lot of these guys like Vody Bochum, that you mentioned, not just Vody, but Doug Wilson. Doug Wilson writes these huge, crazy novels with all of this nonsense about manly men and women's roles. And when I read those and I've done reviews, I can't stop laughing because they're so incredibly silly. So, what I've noticed with a lot of these guys is they have such a warped sense of what a man is, a manly man, that sometimes their ideas about what is actually masculine seem almost like they're straight out of some kind of, how do I say this kindly? Like they're quite easy to bait. It's almost like they're in such denial that they are gay and they're in super denial. They're going to be the most masculine ever, and it comes off as weak, wimpy, whiny. It comes across as anything but masculine. Very homoerotic displays of extreme masculinity. Exactly. Oh my goodness. That's exactly very homoerotic. Just as much as those magazines from the 50s where they had shirtless sailors with bulging muscles polishing missiles. Like, that's not some kind of homoerotic, homoerotic fat penis, penile extension or something. I laughed about those things. I've seen them, and so they're almost that way. Doug Wilson is, even though he's a round little ball of a man with a beard and white hair, and isn't the most masculine seeming. And like so many others, Steven Anderson, if I had not known better and I'd seen him out of the context that he's in, I would have had a very different opinion of what his, it's the fantasy that counts. Yeah. I would have had a different idea about his sexuality if I just laid eyes on him and not knowing who he was. And so many of these guys, so when they go in these weird things, you're just like, start laughing because it seems almost like they're just like in such a denial, like Kelvin and Keith from the Righteous Gemstones. I mean, it's clear to everybody around them they're gay. It's clear to everyone who sees them they're gay. It's not clear to them they're gay. And I don't care who's gay and who's not gay. I don't think being gay is a negative thing. I think it's just how you're wired. And I know from personal experience that if you are not living the life that is inside of you, if you're not living that life and you are having to deny and hide your essential nature, you're going to be miserable and you're going to spread that misery around. And going back to the transformed wife, I think that's her whole problem. I think she's living a life she feels like she should be living, not what suits her at all. And what that with her, I can't even tell you what that would be like to suit her because she's got some kind of strange quirks there. And I just wouldn't even begin to know with her. So Steven Anderson has these things too. I remember finding out that he liked to run in the desert barefoot and just laugh and howl with laughter because that's one of those hyper masculinity behaviors that I'm talking about. I ain't walking through no desert barefooted. I don't like thorns. I don't like pieces of glass. I don't like my feet resembling rhino hide on the bottom. I tend to wear even my flip-flops. But he's acting like this is some kind of masculine challenge. It's not. It's running, for goodness sake. Anybody can run. Well, most anybody. I wouldn't run even if I could, because it's just not my thing. I get sweaty. It's not pleasant. Parts flop here, there, and everywhere. When you're a little heavier chested, it is really a problem when you start running. So I don't do that. I did when I was younger, and I blew out both of my knees in my 20s and had to have knee injections at 23. Yay, running. So that was the point I dropped it. So many times said so many times Stephen says these horrible, horrible things about. Let me pull up. I was just looking at one of his pieces that I had quoted that I was laughing over because it's utterly ridiculous. He was claiming that the 23rd Psalm, and you know which one I'm talking about, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That one. I went in and looked at his sermons and was looking at the sermon notes and things. And he said the 23rd Psalm was a roadmap for marriage. I don't think so. And he was saying that the part of walking through the valley of the shadow of death means Jesus wants you to buy a gun to protect your wife. Buy a gun. Great. You know, just what every loosely wrapped paranoid wingnut needs is a gun, a lethal weapon. And I'm not opposed to people having weapons at all. I am in favor of people having an education, It's not a roadmap for marriage or anything else. It's just a roadmap for what that person's walk was that wrote that, whether it was King David or whoever. I find it's a comforting one, but to think it's a roadmap for marriage and then it also means you gotta buy a gun to protect your wife is just insane. And I'm not opposed to people having guns. I'm not opposed to the Second Amendment. I am opposed to insane people having guns. I'm opposed to how easy they are to obtain and how we have some that are on the market in America that are not, um, this should only be in the hands of the military and the police as far as I'm concerned. Not everybody needs an a automatic weapon, okay? Hunting rifles, fine. I had a job once where I had to carry a pistol. I had to have permit and carry a pistol. I was delivering air freight, and one of these days, I'll tell you guys the amusing story about Jimmy Swaggart's ministries and the day I delivered the air freight there. Um, so we would carry these huge payrolls. I would sometimes have to drive up to Angola and Louisiana, drop off the payroll and drop off the checks for the prisoners who were selling plasma and blood products because apparently they still sold them from the prison at that point. This would have been 1979, 1980, around then. And I had a gun. I knew how to use it. I had been trained by a police officer at the shooting range. I knew how to break it down, how to take it apart. I knew all about using it. And I was a pretty good shot in those days. So I'm not opposed to that. There are always going to be those circumstances where you're going to need one. And that's one of those circumstances. Even though now a sawed off shotgun is about all I would handle down. But there are now a lot of wing nuts with guns. Yep, there are. I expect people with guns to have reasonable models of guns and safety training. Then put a licensing requirement on the guns. Cheryl, I don't know how they did it in Holland when you were there, the Netherlands, but I know how they do it here in Costa Rica, and it's very different because I did through that process myself. Um, you have to prove you're not insane first. Seriously, you have to go to a psychologist and they have to determine you're not crazy. It's not an automatic that you will be given a gun permit here. You have to really jump through some big hoops, including put some money up in case someone gets shot and you have the proper insurance to pay for them. Who is back there scratching my chair up? I have to pay for, hey, Stinky. You have to pay for them to have, what are you doing? To be able to pay for their medical. That's basically what it is. And I'm not opposed to that. I'm not opposed to making people jump through a few hoops to have them because that's the only responsible thing. But according to Stephen, you're just supposed to run out and heavily arm yourself. And that's what scares me about the Isaacs and the Solomons of this world. Seeing that they're still buying into this toxic masculinity crapola that their father pushed. And I would hope that neither one of them would be somebody that would be tempted to use a weapon to settle a dispute. People don't have a gun culture there. People need to belong to clubs, and they tend to keep the guns at their clubs. It's a smart way to do it too. In Germany, it was just very difficult unless you were having a hunting rifle, which was fine. But as far as pistols, that sort of things, those were something that either was a shooting club or you were Polizei. It wasn't something that the average citizen could access. Um, so I don't know what the answer is on that, but you have somebody who's what I call an ammosexual because he's a gun nut, obviously, and he's promoting these things, and I'm just going like this, like, no, I don't think so, dude. And Abused offspring sometimes have to struggle with negative influences from their abusive parents. Yes, I know that. They do. And again, deconstruction from abuse takes time. It takes time, it takes intentionality. And I don't doubt at some point each one of them is gonna have their reckoning. I don't think they're there yet. I think John is farther along on the deconstruction path than they are, but maybe not by a whole lot. It takes time and it's painful. It's painful and it's lonely. And like I said, none of us have perfect families. Everyone has family drama. Everyone has family squabbles. Everyone in families sees issues differently. And that's not to say that each other is right or wrong most of the time. But when you get in these groups where there's extreme abuse and you tend to believe all of the victims, all the people that come forward, because for that many people to tell a story that is interconnected like theirs is awful. And I feel bad for Solomon because he really has gone through some stuff with his father and his mother. There was a failed engagement. Um, I had heard rumors about why that broke up. I'm not going to talk about that. Just that it happened, and it apparently wasn't pretty on anybody's side. There were some allegations made against Solomon that were pretty serious. The dude I saw in the 2 videos has definitely got his quirks, but he's not that dude, so maybe he's dealt with those things. I don't know, but again, healing from being abused, having the spiritual abuse thing happen, and leaving and starting to deconstruct and then reconstruct what you believe your faith is afterwards, it's very different, and it's very hard to do that. Very hard. It just blows my mind sometimes because I will think that I'm over it and realize I'm not. And there are also times with your family, particularly when you have family you don't agree with, you have to put boundaries in place. You have to put firm boundaries in place and say, no, I'm not willing to do that any longer, and say, I'm sorry, but the door is shut on that, and go low contact or no contact. It happens. It just is what it is with these things. The victims have to heal and unlearn the bad behavior models before they them to not pass them down to their future offspring. And Debbie, that is the hardest part. I wasn't until probably my mid-30s before I realized that some of the things I'd grown up with were very toxic, that I had just decided were just part of being an adult. Fortunately for me, they weren't things that I indulged in. It had to do with alcohol because alcohol is huge in my family of origin. Huge, huge, huge. I'm talking about addicted grandparents, cousins, aunts and uncles, the whole darn thing. Hey, Sherry. It is late afternoon, early evening here. Oh, it's evening here. Oh, I just lost a day. The last couple of nights with the Anderson kids and the different videos, I've been staying up and seeing that. And it's kind of funny because I'm watching these people that don't cover these topics jumping on the bandwagon to talk about them. And that's fine. Everybody can talk about whatever they want. But it always makes me laugh when I see people who are all about clicks and coins jump on the bandwagon to start talking about stuff. But it's all good because we want it to be known in the media as much as possible or out there when these things happen and how we can safely deconstruct and looking at what's being said. It's a sensational story on the face of it, but I hope it doesn't cause further strife for any kids. I hope it doesn't either, Lily. And I want to see, I hope that Miriam stays safe until her 18th birthday. For me, I think that's the thing I'm really worried about the most with those kids. I'm worried about John and I'm worried about her. Isaac and Solomon, I'm less worried about because they're still kind of family adjacent. I think eventually they will I think they'll go through their deconstruction journeys like a lot of us do. What about the kids that are still home? I think what has to happen with that, CPS has to take this seriously. They have to realize that for all of the faking that the Anderson family has done to get off CPS radar, that it's a pile of BS. They have to do a more thorough investigation. I'm kinda surprised they didn't in the wake of what happened with the teenagers, because that was pretty awful, and They didn't do a very serious one by any stretch of the imagination. I know the police did get involved, but CPS in their area of the country is pretty crappy thing. Girl in the Ozarks, I think that I heard that Miriam was, I've had about 6 months more to go. I don't remember exactly when her birthday is. I could have told you when I was working at NLQ when it was. I'm sure when Miriam turns 18, she'll be willing to testify to the court. This may even push Isaac and Solomon to consider it as well. That seems to have been John's biggest roadblock. I don't doubt at all it was John's biggest roadblock. But you have to understand that Isaac and not and even more so Solomon are kind of still in the orbit of the family. And as I keep saying, family is difficult. Family is complex. It's hard to turn your back on your parents. It just is. It's hard for a parent to turn their back on their child. It was so cruel of Anderson to tell his daughter nobody would ever marry her because she was ugly. She's not ugly at all. No, she's not ugly. Ah, my commercials are in Spanish. Ah, oh my word. What a week it's been. I was just putting together what is this thing? A true and tidy spray mop this morning, well, this afternoon, because my afternoon was my morning because I've been staying up and watching some of these videos. And I got the biggest laugh out of this. I got the biggest laugh out of the directions to the spray mop actually said that mentally ill people shouldn't operate it. What the hell, True and Tidy? What the hell? That cuts out a lot of housewives. Not all of them, but there's a certain subsect that would be using that thing that would not be able to. And you're right, no one is ugly. I think that is what I found the most horrific about about Solomon's ranting about fat people, is that knowing the history of how people have ended up the way they are, knowing the history of how people in my own family have ended up that way, my husband and his little belly, various others, myself. And knowing that it is a struggle and you're fighting various things, and just put a blanket statement out there that people who are fat don't care about themselves and they aren't worthy and all that is just ridiculous. Utter ridiculous. It's right up there with ugly. Nobody is ugly as far as I'm concerned either. Even people who aren't classically handsome and pretty aren't ugly. I've seen very few people that I would actually classify as ugly. People are interesting looking. I'm always intrigued when I see people that aren't part of the norm, and I'm not intrigued by bland prettiness or handsomeness. I learned a long time ago that super handsome men are a handful in and of themselves, just like very rich ones. Yeah, I disagree with obesity as a lifestyle is a weird take. Absolutely, it's a weird take. It's a very weird take. It just is. It's like saying, "I disapprove of skinniness as a lifestyle," or "I disapprove of tattooed people as a lifestyle." There are people out there that say that, and it's kind of funny because one of those is Lori Alexander, and Lori likely has a tattoo without knowing it. If you get radiation for cancer, and CyberKnife is radiation, and I looked this up. CyberKnife requires you to go in there and get a teeny tiny little blue dot tattoo where they're aiming the CyberKnife at. because it is so important that they hit the cancer with the exact radiation. Shoot, I had one of those little blue dots forever until I had it removed. I removed it because I was having, I was near a mast cell growth that I had removed. My plastic surgeon said, "Oh, let's just go ahead and remove this too." I was like, "Whatever. I'm just interested in you having the mast cell thing removed and it going off to the pathology lab." Now, yeah, personalities can definitely be ugly, particularly if you decide that you're going to judge everybody for something as minor as looks. What's really ugly is ugly character, arrogance, hostility, cruelty, manipulating. Exactly. Those are the things that are truly ugly in this world. And I am not a big fan of any of that. So, you know what I'm about to do? I am about to immerse myself in the world of, well, I was going to watch the end of, I can't even think of the name of it. It's a show on HBO about the robber barons around 1880, and let my husband do all his political wrestling and watching the vice president debate and all of that. And I'm just not feeling that today. I'm going to fold clothes and crochet and eat pumpkin pie tonight instead of all of that. And I'm definitely not going to be thinking about the Andersons because I think we're getting to the point where there's less to say about them. I'm going to be posting up bits and pieces from NLQ that I keep finding from No Longer Quivering, that I keep finding that I've had published about the Andersons, that I keep, it's kind of like jump scares. They're jumping out, and I'm going, "Oh no, this fits with what I'm saying." Because I had somebody earlier trying to tell me that the Andersons did not do any kind of food um, withholding in their family. And I was like, "Well, I got two articles that Susanna wrote where she said she was justifying putting locks on the fridge, the freezer, and the pantry and for teenagers." And she talked about finding food wrappers behind the washer, I think it was, which when you have kids that are eating stuff and hiding the wrappers, that is the kind of food hoarding behavior you see in foster families, foster kids, where they have been deprived of food, where there's been extreme food security, insecurity in the family. They tend to do that. They tend to do that quite a bit. And cats that when you've taken them off the street, that would bug you anytime their food bowl, they could see the bottom of it. They're just those weird learned behaviors. And like you were saying, you have to unpack all that stuff for your parents when you've had that toxic nonsense going in and decide where your line is and what you're going to scoop that out and replace it with. Because we all pick up those crazy things. One of the ones that I picked up was being anxiety over spending money. And I had to deal with that. And I put that one to death, but I used to do that. I get really anxious anytime I had to buy anything, I had to spend money on a plumber, whatever. Anxious, anxieties galore. And I know it goes back to something in my childhood. I just don't know what. What would be better is national, yeah, national taking charge. That would be. I would like to see all of those kids in therapy, okay? Because that's the only way you get all that stuff out. The only way you get the nonsense out is to go into therapy. This light is driving me crazy over my head. Um, that is the only way. Therapy, therapy, therapy. And I would like to see, I hate to say this, I would like to see Susanna leave Stephen. If her kids are to be believed, she has said she's wanted to many times. And I don't doubt that at all because that's one of the things I know about that kind of life. So many of these women that are down on it, you have to take breaks from subjects sometimes. I want to eventually get a small published, okay, pointing out signs and signs of abusive, yeah, nature. in person to avoid abusive marriage. Debbie, I've thought about doing a book on that because I used to work at a place that was a children's residential treatment center, and I would work with a lot of really young people, and I was in my 50s. And so many times I would listen to these women having conversations. They would tell me their trouble. We can't force her. She has to realize that she's better than that. That she should not be accepting that type of abuse as a given. God's not going to strike her dead for abuse of divorcing an abuser. As far as I'm concerned, an abuser has violated the basic marriage contract. So I worked with all these young ladies, and they would tell me their problems with their men, and I would laugh sometimes and just say, "Why are you putting up with that? You're so much better than that. You have so much to offer. Why is this an acceptable behavior for you? Where's the red flag? Why are you not looking at that red flag? That red flag is huge. There's a whole fleet of them." And some very funny things happened then. Like, one day, we had a gal I knew, she's about 27, but she had had a hard life and had been through some things, including alcoholism in her early 20s, and she ran into our office one day and said, "Quick, quick, how do I give the job that starts with blow?" She didn't turn it quite like that, but I can't say the word because this thing, okay. And I had to ask her why. We were all looking at each other in the room because we were like, I was in my 50s. I was working with some gals that were in their 30s and 40s. We're all looking at each other like, hmm. And I had to say, why? Why? And so she started telling me this convoluted story about this guy she met at AA, that she wanted to have him fall in love with her and leave the baby mama, okay? And her idea on that was, since she'd been re-virginized at her church, she wanted to know how to do the job that was blow and didn't know at 27. I thought it was a little weird, but we talked to her for a long time and was trying to tell her, "Sweetheart, I don't know if he does, I don't care if he looks exactly like Brian Gosling. Number 1, it's AA, and, they don't encourage you to date people you're going to AA with. That's a real no-no. They say you shouldn't have romantic relationships for a certain length of time after getting sober." There's so many things, and we all talked to her, and I never heard how that story resolved, but it was kind of funny. Those who scream, "God hates divorce," ought to cite what Psalm 11:5 says about how God feels about people who love violence. I know. I mean, that's horrific that they even think that. That they even think that. One time I was driving through rural West Virginia, and I heard a sermon from an IFB pastor saying that if you divorced and you remarried, not only were you going to hell, but your husband or wife was going to hell, and your children were going to hell, and their descendants were going to hell. And it was like, what the heck? Okay. So Jesus tightened up all the rules on divorce, but abuse, I would think, would be one of those. If you break the marriage contract by having adultery or beating somebody, it seems like that would be all bets are off the table. One of the things that happened in my old Clearfield church is we had a lady whose husband was essaying the kids, and he finally got removed from the household. He lost custody of all of her children. They went into foster care. One was returned to her later, and she didn't want to divorce her husband. She wanted to do the, yeah, that preacher's messed up. Yeah, he's real messed up. She didn't want to divorce her husband, and our pastor, thank God for him. I mean, he and I may have knocked heads sometimes, but thank God for him because he told her, and several other of us told her, it's like, he molested your children. How on earth are you going to stay married to him? He has broken the parental covenant, and you have to protect your children. She finally did. She finally divorced him. And there were a handful of other divorces, very few in our old church, but we had an awful lot of very unhappy married people that at one point decided to try to drive everybody who was divorced out of the church. And there were a lot of people that were married in the church that had been previously married, like myself. I was married very young for a very short period of time, and it was a abusive disaster. I got away, and I waited 10 years before I remarried, almost. So, it's just never a good idea to marry that young. And this person went around, she figured out who all was divorced and remarried, wrote up these notes telling us we're all going to hell, ordering us to stop going to the church, put the notes on our car. So I'm walking in like, what is this? To the pastor later and saying, can you read this stupid thing? And he ended up throwing that lady out of the church. So even though my pastor was kind of messed up, oh, and I got a story that kind of goes along with the thing I was complaining about Solomon about. Our old worship team, our church, our pastor would weigh us. Not very often, but when he thought everybody was getting a little too fluffy, out would come the scale. It was right in the worship team contract that we signed, saying that if you were not your goal weight, you agreed to be weighed and have him make suggestions to help you. Like at one point, he ordered everybody to go sign up for Gold's Gym. I wonder what one's supposed to do if an individual doing the things in 1 Corinthians 5:11 is supposedly is one's. I would have to even read what Corinthians 5:11 says to be able to tell you because I don't have a Bible handy. I have I have my computer. Oh yeah, that's one of those things. Exactly. Exactly. Word spouse. Yeah. Not a fan. Not a fan of telling other people what to do. That's what scares me about a lot of these groups is that they wanna tell you exactly what to do, and I'm one of these people where I'm kinda like, "You do you, boo." I mean, that's what I said on Solomon's video today. I said, "You do you, boo," because that's literally it, and I don't have to be offended by how others live their lives or the choices they make. That's really on them. And my only real concern in all of this is I wanna see all of the kids protected. I wanna see the adult children get healed. But to quote the silly, Toby Mac, 'cause yeah, there's a Toby Mac quote that I'm blanking on now. "I can hold your hand, but I can't turn your eyes to freedom." And I think about that one a lot when I'm talking to people who've been abused and making suggestions like, "Nope, nope, nope." And I know yesterday I was really frustrated with one of my friends because I was trying to explain to her about a situation in my family that I was struggling with, and she was like, well, you have to do this prayer and this thing and this other thing. And and I was just like, no, talk to the head. I'm not doing that. And then I had another friend that said, oh, what you said to her, that person was not right. You should have said, mm-mm-mm. Said, well, actually, what I said to that person involved the kind of things that we were taught to say in Stephen's ministry that if you're a trained psychologist or a therapist or whatever, you would say that to a patient who was struggling because your goal is to let the person know you hear them. You hear what they're saying. You may not agree with everything they're saying, but you hear them. Sometimes being heard is the best thing that we can do for others. And I suspect as extreme as Steven Anderson is taking so many things that he doesn't feel heard or respected, and that's why we are seeing all this nonsense. We're seeing the hypermasculinity that tells him that he's gotta be the buffest and whatever, and he doesn't feel heard. This is a man that's so tiny, weak, and wimpy inside that he had to start a new religion because he couldn't handle the authority and the pushback in the IFB, which is pretty toxic sometimes too. All you have to do is look at what Jack Shope did and see that. That's another disturbing thing about Vody Beauchamp wants child protective services totally abolished, and parents could abuse without limits. That's exactly right. That scares me too. That scares me too, particularly having worked in a facility where we had children that had been through the worst of abuse, just the worst of the worst. There were times when I was working with doing an audit of the treatment notes to make sure that the place got paid, number one, for Medicaid, and number two, they didn't earn a Medicaid or Medicare fine, where I would read these notes and be putting them in charts and looking at the charts and going, oh my word, because the stories were all crazy things. And if the Vody Beauchamps of this world got their way, there'd be no way for those kids to be protected. And that's, to me, that's the scariest thing of all. And the cases were bad ones. Like one boy was kept in the cellar with his mother for 3 years, and the boyfriend would come down and would RAPE the mother in front of the child and would burn the child with lit cigarette butts. That was just one example of one of the stories, one of the horrific stories that we had to put up with there. And you hear that stuff all the time, and it just gets to you. That's kind of why I had to leave the field between that and the mastocytosis. I just could not anymore. And once I was working doing treatment doc auditing in one of the houses where they house the children, and a work crew came through and pulled up all the flooring, and there was black mold beneath it. So, that's what led me to Pathos, and I had been deconverted for not deconverted, deconstructing for a while. And deconstruction, I've seen so many abusive cases coming out of that too. And I can tell you every day for the first 2 years after I left my old church, I cried every single day because on the streets of my small southern town, I would always run into somebody from my old church who chose to be abusive every single time, just heaped blame on me. And I know I'm not special. I know this goes on. So I know that this is what happens with these groups when people leave. They get demonized. They will say things to you that are just horrific. And you're just like, what? You said you were my brother and sister in Christ. You said you loved me. We had all this fun together. You let me take your child on 3 international trips. And now you're telling me you cannot talk to me because I'm evil? All I did was leave our old church and go to the Methodist church. Please tell me how that is evil. So I went through a lot of that, and that is the part of the process that I don't like, thinking about any of these 4 kids going through, and there will be at least some of that going on. And it's hard when you start wrestling with your faith and your ideas, and you run up against cognitive dissonance. That's a whole different ballgame, and you start realizing, "I can't put up with this any longer." It's like Kevin Young, a evangelical minister that I like a lot, that I'm friends with on Twitter and Facebook. He talked about, for him, the whole George Floyd thing was just incredibly, I get so confused, was the thing that really flipped him into thinking about what it was he believed and about cognitive dissonance. So it's different for everybody. Everybody comes up with these things. And for me, it was the time that they took us away for deliverance ministry, my husband and I. And I very quickly figured out that the deliverance ministry place that was doing it, they were full of beans, no idea what they were doing and the damage they were doing. They told both of us that the other one had cheated, and neither one of us had cheated ever. And it was just so much like that, that if we had not known each other as well as we did, it could have broken a marriage up. Okay, I see why I'm getting goofy. It's been almost an hour. Okay, you guys, I'm gonna have to go. I'll talk to you later. I may be starting to wind this down with the Andersons unless something else comes up. But for right now, I'm looking at this and just looking at a pile of crazy. Stephen's behavior has just been awful since this started, and it's gotten worse. Love you guys. I'll see you later.